Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Meter Cute interviews here on Meter and Mayhem. Today, I'll be chatting with the official Eclipse poet of Indiana, Linda Neal Reising. Linda is a native of Oklahoma and a citizen of the Cherokee Nation whose work has appeared in places such as the Southern Indiana Review, Comstock Review, and Nimrod, as well as anthologies such as Fruit Flesh, Seeds of Inspiration for Women Who Write, and Let Me Say This, a Dolly Parton poetry anthology. Her latest collection is Vivia, The Legend of Vivia Thomas, a novelette in poems, which is out now from Kelsay Books. And 2024 has been a big year for Linda because she also had a chapbook, Perpetual Astonishment, come out, which won the Beyond Words chapbook contest. And her first book of fiction, Cigar Box of Loss, Stories from Route 66, is forthcoming from Bell Point Press. That's a lot. Are you ready to find out more about Linda's work? Me too. So let's sit back, relax, and get ready to fall in love.
I will be reading today from Vivia, The Legend of Vivia Thomas, a novelette in poems, and I'm going to begin with the prologue. There is no doubt that Vivia Thomas was a real person, that she lived, died, and was buried at Fort Gibson National Cemetery in Fort Gibson, Oklahoma in 1870. Almost everything else about the woman's life is a question mark, surrounded by mystery and conjecture. In fact, her story is not one of biography, but of legend. When I first read about Vivia's fascinating life, or at least the stories that have been created about her, I knew that I wanted to learn more. And if that proved impossible, then to create my own tales about her, to make her a living, breathing person. Just like Vivia, we will all live, die, and fade into obscurity. Unless, of course, we become legends, having our stories told around campfires. And who knows? Maybe we will linger nearby, listening. My birth, 1840. My grandmother once told me, when my mother was not near, for such matters were not discussed among ladies, that I was born without breath, blue as the moon on the Boston snow that night in January, when I made my entrance into this world. The doctor, a friend of my father's, would have declared me dead had it not been for the quick action of an Irish girl, hired as a wet nurse only the day before, after her child had succumbed to a fever at 2 weeks of age. Aideen was her name, and she took my limp body in her rough hands, chafed my chest. Then, according to grandmother, she put her mouth to my lips, breathed her own life into mine, saying a Hail Mary every time she raised her head to draw a breath. My family was not Catholic, and her words surely sounded like a spell, an incantation, as she called to her Holy Mother, desperate to save this baby, a baby not of her womb. Her magic worked, and I gasped air, screamed my way into this life. Perhaps, as I look back now, it would have been better if the peasant girl had wrapped me in the soft shawl my mother had knitted, had hurried from the house to bury me beside her little one, maybe making a bargain with her gods, an exchange of one child for another, a soul for a soul, one much worthier than mine. Aideen. My mother did not recover from my birth for some time, having just delivered my brother only a year earlier. There had been 3 girls and 2 small white crosses in the graveyard before the birth of Charles. So he was greeted with great jubilation, named after our father. My brother carried sunshine on his shoulders. And years later, when I saw drawings of Atlas in my school books, the god bearing the world, I thought that it looked like Charles if the orb had been glowing and warm. So I was left to Aideen. Is it possible to possess a memory from such an early age? There are times I seem to capture a moment from long ago, being cradled in her warm arms, my face pressed against her soft breast, everything soft as I twirl a red curl that falls softly down her shoulder and listen as she sings a soft song whose words I do not know, but which always brings a soft tear that drops onto my upturned, adoring face. Alone. When Aideen and I were alone, she dressed me in my best coat, forest green in color with a collar of red fox fur, and we ventured into a world of noise and smells, a society I would never have known existed, protected as I was, like a daguerreotype behind glass. We walked away from the granite-stoned streets outside my home to clustered shops where women haggled over the cost of cabbage. She held my small gloved hand, shoved her way through crowds of people disheveled in their destitution, desperate from deprivation. But not one ever made a move to harm me as Aideen navigated us through the seas of humanity. And no matter our errands, we always ended at a cemetery, devoid of tombstones and monuments, like the ones in the graveyard behind our church. Markers were nothing more than flat stones stood upright, blank and moss-covered, or twigs bound together with twine, leather. Kneeling, she whispered a prayer to clutched beads while I stood in silence, wishing she loved me as much as the bone child beneath the ground. Torn away. How strange the passage of time when one is a child. Long, languorous days of summer, sun-silken and warm, dappling through elms. Hours crawl like common garden snails, content to inch from peony stalk to dahlia stem. Drowsy dreams fill the daylight like a sated bee dozing inside a blossom. I remember thinking my blessed life would always be like this. Even my mother, cold in her affections most of the time, would stroke my hair as I lay my head on her lap, as we lounged on a wicker settee under an arbor of wisteria. 5 summers passed in this way. One day, as I plucked a rose for Aideen, she brought her hands to her face and wept great breathless sobs caught in her throat, and I asked if a thorn had pierced her hand. She drew me to her, saying no, her heart was pierced instead. Our time together was coming to an end. I was no longer a baby in need of nurture, but a child old enough to learn real lessons, reading, writing, all of the wonders she had never known. Within the week, a governess would be arriving to take her place. I placed my face against her cheek and sent up a howl that filled the August air, but nothing would ever fill my own emptiness. Thank you.
Wow, Linda, that makes me that I'm hooked. I want to from the very first poem, right? Like that comparison already saying somebody else's life would have been better served than my like, oh, I want to know what's up with Vivia. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Well, thank you. This is based upon an Oklahoma legend. And although I grew up in Oklahoma for the first 25 years of my life, and then I actually moved back for 3 years between 2013 and 2016, I had never heard of the legend. And one time it was around Halloween time. I was just kind of messing around with the computer and Googling ghost stories from Oklahoma. And I started seeing something about the legend of Vivia Thomas, and I just wasn't familiar with it at all. And so I found two different people online who had done some research about her. And so I contacted them. In fact, I left out part of the intro, but I do mention them in the intro. And I contacted them, and it was Wade Burleson and Marilyn Hudson. And I said, have you done research on this person? Are you going to write? Because they were both writing books. And so I thought they were going to write books about her. I didn't want to write anything that would conflict with what they were doing. So I contacted them and I said, are you going to be writing books about Vivia Thomas? And both of them said, well, I've researched her, and what you see online is all I could find. And they had both, or I guess they had done some research in Oklahoma too as well, but they really found just about the same information, and it was kind of bare bones. And so in a way, that gave me a little more freedom,
Mm.
because then what I could do was take what we actually know about her, because we know she was a real person. I've been to her grave, so we know where she's buried. She is buried in the cemetery at Fort Gibson.
Okay.
She is buried in the hero circle there. And so, but it did allow me the freedom then to create her backstory. And so that is what I did. So this is a combination of research and imagination, really. And the legend.
Wow. And that's such a wonderful place to be in as a writer, because you have something to go on, but you've also got the freedom to make it what
Exactly.
you will.
Exactly.
Wow. Um, I was also really struck by your ability to craft a very clear narrative without losing contact with sort of the intense focus on language that poetry brings. I really enjoyed that about what you were reading.
Well, thank you. And I know I had one person review my book, and it was a beautiful review. But the person wrote, I love the narrative, but Linda doesn't really use many poetic elements. And I was like, oh, there are lots of poetic elements in there. I didn't want it to sound like formal poetry. I wanted to have that sort of melodic, almost like storytelling feel to it. But I didn't want to lose the poetry. I didn't want to lose it has a lot of internal rhyme if you are actually looking at it. Um, it has similes and metaphors, of course, and alliteration and lots of poetic devices. But I didn't want to hammer people over the head with it. because I wanted them to concentrate also on the narrative aspect of the story, because it is a novelette. And it is to be read just as you would read a novel. I mean, you start at the beginning and you go through. And what I tried to do at the end of many of the poems is to end it the way a person might end a chapter in a novel, where you want to find out, like you were talking about the ending of the first one. You want to find out, oh, well, what was so horrible about her life that she wasn't worthy to live it? And so I tried to do that periodically throughout the book to try to keep the reader reading to find out what was going to happen. And I know I had one woman tell me, I did a reading in Indy, and she said, the part that you read is so sweet and calm. And she said, things happen that I wasn't expecting later on. And I said, well, I have to be careful about what I read in the book because I don't want to give the plot away. And so normally, Vivia, I just do those some of the opening poems just to give the people a little bit of the background, but I don't want to give away the plot.
Oh, excellent. Well, and I think that beginning gives us a little bit of a hint that something's going to go down, right? Like we should be expecting something. So,
Yeah.
um, excellent. Well, and I'm curious to know, who is a poet that you're in love with? Whose work do you gravitate toward?
There are just so many poets I love. I know that you do a lot of things with formal poetry. If I had to pick one formal poet to love, it would be Donald Justice.
Mm.
And I actually had the opportunity to meet him. And I will admit, I was kind of like a teenager when I met him, like starstruck. But one year I audited at Swanee at the Writers' Conference in Tennessee. And I attended a get together, and he was there. And I went up and introduced myself, and he was just so kind and so gracious. And he was just everything that I hoped he would be. And I just love his work so much because although it's formal, he does have a variety, so it's not a tedious formality. I think some formal poets, it can get a little tedious. He has such variety in his writing that they're all very different. If I had to pick a favorite poem of his, I would probably pick Men at 40. And in fact, I even wrote Women at 40 in response to his poem, Men at 40. And I did that because I don't know whether you're familiar with Men at 40 or not, but it's really kind of depressing.
Okay.
And I thought Women at 40, to me, when a woman turns 40, it's not a depressing thing. It's you're finally kind of getting over that hump, so to speak.
Right.
And so I made mine more uplifting, I guess, rather than his was like kind of sad, but mine was more of an uplifting poem. But as far as regular poets who are not specifically formalists, I love Ted Kooser. I love his stories. I love his attention to detail. I love his personification. Um, I love Mary Oliver. Uh, I love nature poetry. And I love how she writes about nature, but then it's always related back to our human experience too. It's not just nature poetry. Um, I like Billy Collins, of course. Um, a newer poet who's writing right now that I love is James Cruz.
Okay.
And he has put together some fabulous anthologies. But I think his own poetry is just so fabulous because, again, that attention to detail, I love it. But there are just so many, it's hard to narrow down.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Um, do you have a favorite poem of James Cruz's that pops to mind? Or
Oh
I
gosh.
don't mean to put you on the spot there because I
Um, I'm trying to think. I mean, I read his every day. I'm trying to think of one recently that I thought was so good. But there are just so many where he is just looking at, just maybe a flower that he sees while he is out walking. But it's not just a flower when he describes it. I don't know. I just love all of his poems. I think he does a great job.
Yeah, because so much food for poems is just all around us in
Right,
every
right.
day that we're living, for
And I
sure.
wish I could, I can't think of a title right off the top of my head, but there are just so many. And like I say, he posts something every day, and then I get his work through my email. And so every day I'm reading something that he is writing. I also love George Bilger.
Okay, yeah.
Love him. I love his humor. I think and again, through email, I receive a poem every day that he picks from other poets. And he says, I love this poem and this is why. And so he chooses some fabulous poems by other poets.
Wow.
But I love his work too.
So are when you say that you get things through email, are those Substacks that they run, or is that coming through some other
Some
program?
are, but some are just, like through Facebook. You can sign up with different people to get, emails daily. But some are Substacks that I get. Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm gonna need to look into
Check
that.
into those.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean some days my inbox is a little bit overrun, but it wouldn't be such a bad thing to be overrun with poetry, I think. So
Yes.
um so I'm kind of wondering also about, because I know that um you said that you were born in Oklahoma, then you were away, then came back, and now you're in Indiana. So it sounds like you've um had lots of different places geographically, and usually what goes along with that also is sort of different iterations of ourselves.
Right. Well, Oklahoma will always be home. That's where my family always was. Of course, now I don't have a whole lot of family left there, but I still have some family that I visit. But I am a citizen of the Cherokee Nation. My family on my father's side ended up in Oklahoma because we were driven there on the trail. And what was really interesting, a few years ago, I actually got to visit our home place, I guess you would say, in Tennessee. It's in the very southern part of Tennessee, just over the Georgia border. And it's a place called Blythe Landing. And my family had a huge plantation there, and they owned the ferry. And so, as the removal started, the Cherokees were brought to stockades very close to Blythe Landing, and then they were actually brought to Blythe Landing to camp. And then it was my family that ferried them across the river to start the Trail of Tears. And then eventually, my family had to go too. So that's how we ended up there. My father's family did. So it will always be home because that's where I grew up. But I moved to Indiana in 1980 because I married my husband and he was from Indiana. I did go back to Oklahoma for 3 years to take care of family members.
Mm.
And then after my father, who was the second family member I took care of, passed, then I brought my mother here with me. But yeah, so I feel kind of torn, what is home? Uh, I think both places are home, but I just have a different feeling for each of them. Indiana was where I spent most of my career. I taught for many years. Um, but it's different. It's not Oklahoma.
I'm originally from Ohio, but I've been down in Florida for almost 14 years now. So
Mhm.
I understand that feeling between
Right,
home and home. Like for me, it's home and up home. Like
right,
it has
right.
sort of the difference. Um, what did um what did you teach?
I taught English. I started out teaching high school English. And then when we moved here, I finished my master's degree. And at that point, I taught at a university just as an adjunct professor or lecturer. And then for 27 years, I taught eighth grade English.
Oh, you are you are a strong one, Linda.
People always say, I'm so sorry when I tell them that. But I loved that age. I loved those people because they were old enough to do difficult work, but they were still young enough not to be jaded. And so I loved it. And I was an academic coach. I had speech and theater. I mean, we did it all. And I loved the kids. But it is an interesting age. It is an age filled with emotion. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But I tried to direct that emotion into their writing. And I was amazed at some of the work my kids created. And I still hear from a lot of them. A lot of them are my friends on Facebook. Some have gone on to be writers, and some have gone on to do things like they're actors. Some are teachers. They've done all sorts of things, doctors and attorneys. And, it's interesting to see where life has taken some of them, or most of them.
And do you still have that image of them, the eighth grade version of them kind of juxtaposing with what you see on Facebook now?
I do, and it's very difficult because everywhere I go, I mean, after teaching so many years, I mean, I think I figured one time that I probably taught something like 3,000 students or maybe more. So every time I go someplace, someone's approaching me saying, "Oh, Mrs. Rising, hi, do you remember me?" And a lot of the women have not changed all that much, but there is a great difference between an eighth grade boy and an adult man. And so I almost never recognize the men, just almost never, because they have facial hair, they're just different. But the women, I can sometimes say, "Oh, yes, I always say, tell me your name because I'm terrible with names." But then but I usually recognize the face, but not with the men.
Yeah, there's a lot of what is it? I think it's like once you're 3 years past puberty, um, is when for women you're sort of at your adult height, and yeah, so
Right.
I can see that. Um, so I'm wondering, what advice might you give? Because I'm sure as a teacher you gave lots of advice to students over the years. So what advice would you give to an earlier version of yourself?
I would give the same advice to my earlier self that I have given to a lot of my students. I know I had a former student contact me not too long ago, and she said, I found a journal writing that I had done, and you had written a response to what I had written. And apparently she had written that she wanted to be an actress. And I told her, I said, go for your dream. Do it while you're young. If it doesn't work out, there is always plan B. You can always go ahead and do something else. But if you wait too long, sometimes it's hard to go back. And she said, my parents disagreed with your advice. They did not want her to be an actress. But what I find very interesting is she became an attorney and now she's an actress. So she did go ahead and take my advice. So I would advise anyone young who has a dream, and I told my own grandson this. He wanted to go, he is in school in Nashville. He's in college in Nashville, Tennessee at Belmont. And I said, if you want to pursue any kind of career with the music industry, do it now while you're young. And if it doesn't work out, yeah, it's not the end of the world. You can either major in something else or find something else to do. But it's very difficult to reclaim that dream. And so that would be my advice, not only to my young self, but to any young person. And I know a lot of parents don't like to hear that, but that would be my advice.
So do you feel like the younger version of yourself kind of already took that advice, or were there dreams that you
I
put
think
off
the younger
longer?
version of myself did not get that advice from anyone. And when I remember being in school, and I knew I wanted to be a writer from third grade on. When I was in the third grade, I had a teacher who assigned a short story to us, and I was kind of new to the school. I'd only been there about a half year in the second grade, so this woman didn't really know me at all. I went to a very, very small school, and everybody knew everybody. And so I was kind of the new kid, and she really didn't know what I was capable of or anything. But I turned in the short story, and she asked me to stay after class, and I did. And she said, "Who wrote this story?" And I was extremely shy. I mean, very, very shy. And I was just stunned. I didn't know what to say. And well, I wrote the story. She said, "No, I want to know who wrote the story." She was very accusatory. And I said, "Well, I wrote the story." And at that point, the tears came. And so I think I convinced her, this is my story.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, I started thinking about it. I thought, that must have been pretty good if she didn't think that I wrote this story. And so from that time on, I knew that was something I wanted to do. But every time I would tell a teacher, I want to be a writer, they always said the same thing to me. And it was the worst advice I ever got. They always said, if you're going to be a writer, become an English teacher, because then you could have plenty of time to write. And I don't know when they thought I was supposed to have that time, because I taught for over 30 years altogether and had very little time to do that writing, even during the summer, because I always had classes to take or preparation to do for the next year and that sort of thing. So I just did not get to fulfill my dream really until I retired. Um, and then that was when I started focusing on the writing.
Ah, yeah. That's so interesting that they would, because they would have had to know that they didn't have much time. So why would they think you were going to have?
I'm not sure that everyone teaches English in the same way that I did. I devoted many, many hours to grading papers and things. And, I think a lot of people maybe don't assign that much writing. I don't know. But the way I taught, there was not a whole lot of free time to do a person's own writing. I'll tell you that now.
Yeah. Yeah, I taught for a very short amount of time. I did my student teaching with eighth graders. And then I taught freshmen and sophomores for not very long. And then I went back to graduate school.
Mhm.
Um so yeah, and I don't even think I was doing a great job, and I had no time for
Right,
for anything.
right.
Oh. What advice do you think that younger version of yourself might give to you if she could see you now?
She would probably say, first of all, I think she would congratulate me for finally reaching my goals, for finally doing what I wanted to do in the first place. I think she would be happy for me. Like I say, that I finally got to realize some of my dreams. And it all happened. It just seemed like that once I started writing and started sending things in, everything snowballed very quickly. My first chapbook I sent in 2014. I guess it was published in 2014. And then, since then, well, I have two chapbooks. I have three full books of poetry. I have another book of poetry that's going to be coming out either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. And I have a book of short stories coming out in 2025. So in a very short period of time, in a 10-year period, a lot has happened. I mean, sometimes it's hard for me. I had to kind of pinch myself, that it's actually happened the way it has. Um, and sometimes people will say, well, how long did it take this book to be accepted or that book to be accepted? And sometimes I hate to tell them because it's kind of embarrassing. I'll say, well, That one was 6 days. This one was 7 days. They're like, what? That's not
Wow.
fair, And I said, well, it just kind of happened, it was just strange. So, yeah, it still seems a little unreal sometimes, that I'm finally getting to do what I always wanted to do.
Oh, yeah. Um, and doing it. So my last Meter Cute, we talked a lot. I talked with Diane Lee Moomey about definitions of success. So I'm trying to think about how I'm about to phrase but what I'm about to say, but I think I'm just gonna say it how it's in my head and not that doing the writing very well too, because your books are getting awards and things, right? Like
Thank you.
Vivia's
Yes.
gotten some awards.
Vivia has got really, Stone Roses got a lot of big awards. Stone Roses won the Eric Hoffer Award. It won the Western Heritage Wrangler Award, which was, I don't know whether you're familiar with their ceremony or not, but it is, well, it's all televised. It's like the Oscars. The night that I went in, it was at the what used to be called the Cowboy Hall of Fame in Oklahoma City. It's now called the Western Heritage Museum. But they first had a gathering in the foyer of about 3,000 people. And then we had a huge dinner, and there were probably about 1,500 people at the dinner. But then I had to accept my award again on television. I had a teleprompter, which I'd never used before. And it's really kind of weird when, Kurt Russell was there. He was being honored that night. Taylor Sheridan, who created Yellowstone and all of those shows, he was there getting an award. It was like all these big names and everything. So talk about feeling like a fish out of water. I mean, it was just kind of hard to wrap my mind around it all. And it was just so exciting. That was probably one of the biggest awards that I've gotten. And what else did it win? I've had 3 books as finalists for the Oklahoma Book Award. I have yet to win the Oklahoma Book Award, but it's been a finalist. I've had 3 different books that were finalists. Vivia has won a lot of things, too. It was the Book Fest winner for narrative poetry, the Feather Quill a winner for poetry, for narrative poetry, and just several different things. So yeah, they've done very, very well. And through the years, and I've been lucky enough just to also win like individual competitions. Like I won the Writer's Digest poetry competition one year, and won the trip to New York to go to their conference, which was an eye-opener to me too. What else? So I mean, yeah, so it's been, like I say, just so exciting and just so unexpected too. I mean, I just never expected that I would be winning these awards. So it's very, very exciting.
Well, it has been very exciting getting to talk with you today, and thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule because I know you're off to um the
The
Woody
Woody
Guthrie.
Guthrie. I am a Woody Guthrie poet. So I leave Saturday for Tulsa, and I will be reading at the Woody Guthrie Center there. They have a wonderful museum in honor of Woody Guthrie there. And the Woody Guthrie Festival is very interesting. It's really, it takes place in Okemah, where he was from, where they have a lot of music and things. But then they have readings in Oklahoma City, they have readings in Okemah, and they have readings in Tulsa. So they fill up the whole weekend with Woody Guthrie poets. And so it's an exciting event.
Wow.
So I'm on my way to Oklahoma tomorrow morning.
Well, thank you for stopping by with us today and safe travels. Thank you so much, Linda.
Well, thank you.
Wow, what a fun interview that was. I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I did talking. And one of the things that I think was so great about what Linda talked about was her advice to go for things while you're young. I had this dream the other night, sort of half dream, half nightmare, where it's not like I guess it is a nightmare. See, I had for a long time I had night terrors, and so I thought they were just like, that's what a nightmare is, and then I realized, oh no, there's something sort of a step down, little chiller than what I was experiencing. Anyway, so yeah, it was probably a nightmare. Anyway, where my husband and I were in this sort of post-apocalyptic world, and people were trying to get off of the planet, and they were selecting young people. Only the young people could get off the planet, and the old people had to stay. And that my husband and I were trying to decide if we were young or old, which for us now, that is sort of a legitimate question. Uh, you think my hair is blonde, it is not. I mean, it is ish. But a lot of the things that look like highlights, that's just, they're white. That's just white hair. Um, but in the dream, it came out after all this discussion about whether we were young and did we have time to give something to society or did we not. It came out in the dream that we were supposed to only be 25. And I do remember feeling when I was in my 20s that if I hadn't decided yet and hadn't done things yet, that it was done. And obviously, you can still do things, right? And so, but I love her advice for this reason, because sometimes when you're younger, it's more fun to do those things, to follow those dreams, because you don't have as much of a sense of the weight of reality on you, which, okay, people can just put stuff in the comments. Anybody who's made it this far probably isn't the kind of person who's going to come at me for that statement. But anyway, obviously there are lots of different levels of what the weight of reality looks like for different people. But I know for me, even, I mean, I went through some stuff as a kid, and even with all I'd gone through, I still didn't fully understand what it was like um to be an adult and to have those kind of adult responsibilities, even though I had had responsibilities and had had various things happen. Um that definitely brought a certain amount of the weight of reality on me. And I think sometimes it's more fun to do things when you don't know what the limits are. And maybe that's what I need to do now. I need to just forget what I know about the limits and about the writing world and about how things work. I need to pretend that I'm a middle schooler sitting in Linda in Linda's class getting advice from her. She says, "Go for it." And I'll just pretend. I'm just going to pretend that I'm like, I don't know, 40 years younger than I am. Um yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Are you going to do it too? Let me know down in the comments. Thanks for stopping by.